Hello, everybody. My name is Glenn Morris. I'm the honor of being the CEO for the Chamber of Commerce here in the Santa Maria Valley. And on behalf of the chambers in North County, we want to thank you for joining us for today's video episode. One of the important values we have as chambers is ensuring that our members have strong relationships with our elected officials, and that those elected officials understand the point of view and perspective of the employer community when they're making important decisions. So when we come to election season, one of the things we always try to do is facilitate those conversations and help build those relationships. In a normal cycle, we'd have had you all in a big room and served you breakfast and invited all the candidates to come and join us. With everything else this year, we're doing things differently. And so I want to take a moment and introduce and thank Andy Caldwell for joining us for this session. Andy is a candidate for the congressional seat representing our community. He's been involved in the community as a business advocate for many years now. Full disclosure, he's a fellow Rotarian, and I've gotten to know him through that a little bit as an individual who truly does care about our community. And so, Andy, welcome. Appreciate you being able to make some time to join us today.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So I'm going to just kind of pitch out some questions, and we'll kind of see where the conversation goes. Let's start with the gorilla in every room, with the COVID pandemic that we're all trying to find a way through. As we talk today, there are 3 or 4 proposals being kicked around in the halls of Congress and streets of DC on a I don't know, I forget how many relief packages we've done now, but on another relief package. Wondered if there's any of those that you think makes sense and would support if you were back there voting today, and if not, if what would the outlines of an effective response from the federal level look like to you?
Well, thank you, Glenn. I think many of your members and followers know that I have a radio show. I've had this show on in Santa Maria for almost 30 years. I've interviewed thousands and thousands of guests on that show, and with respect to COVID, I've probably done at least 200 interviews on COVID. At the beginning of this crisis, we did not know exactly what we were going to be facing. We knew from some other countries' experience and Washington State experiences that this thing hit elderly people, especially those who were weak and with compromised immune systems in nursing homes. So we knew that was gasoline on a fire for their health conditions. So I would have supported in completely protecting, isolating those seniors, primarily seniors in those facilities, plus doing something to help isolate the staff that was coming and going. And I also initially, I bought into the plan to flatten the curve. That is, we were supposed to do this for a couple of weeks, where we gave the hospitals the ability to create enough surge capacity in the hospital so that if we got a huge number of people that came down with COVID, that we'd be able to handle that. Well, those 2 to 3 weeks of flattening the curve have now lasted 6 months. And I was fully in support of us financially supporting local businesses and even government services initially, because we didn't know what we were dealing with. However, since that time, I've listened to local disease infection experts, and I've also reviewed the work of Stanford professors, including John Ioannidis and Dr. Atlas, among others. And I've come to the 2 conclusions. Number 1, and this is just pure economics 101, government gets all its money from taxing us, okay? That's where they get their money. They tax us. If they shut us down, they have no tax revenue coming in, at least as it pertains to the business community. That is what we call unsustainable. It's absolutely unsustainable. And my position on any government spending whatsoever is we have to, as responsible stewards, tell the people where we're getting the money. And so we already had a 20-something trillion dollar debt, and they added $5 trillion to that debt, which was already unsustainable. And they've never bothered to tell the American people, the American taxpayers, let alone the business community and specifically, that they're either going to borrow that money and literally never pay it back, or they're going to print the money, leading to inflation. So my firm position on this is you continue to isolate the vulnerable, those that are elderly, those who have comorbidities, but there is absolutely no substitute plan for reopening the economy. And the CDC now has most people believe this thing hit America in December. It hit in January at a minimum. We now have 9 months of American data, plus that much around the world. The bottom line, K through 12 schools never needed to be shut down. And if Costco, Target, and Walmart got to stay open, there is no argument why other small businesses could not have stayed open. And in fact, what that did is it congregated people in the few places that were open, and/or it pushed everybody to Amazon.com. And the point here is people were still producing that stuff, delivering that stuff, and/or selling it, and small business got left out of that whole process. So I didn't like the scenario to begin with, and now we've got to do our best to recover from it.
So, as you look, from where we are moving forward, other than, beyond just lifting the restrictions and allowing small business to recover, reopen and do what they do, are there any specific steps that you would recommend, again, from the federal response level, or is this really now more of a state and local situation going forward?
Well, I always believed it was state and local primarily, but because this thing was so huge and it was so unknown, I believe that's one of the things the federal government is there to do, is to help bail out states and local communities. But Gavin Newsom has to own this now. He talked about how many billions in reserves he has, et cetera, et cetera. He has one of the most punitive closure orders still in place. And here's the point. Initially, we had a statewide emergency, just like we had a national emergency, because we didn't know what we were dealing with. But the bottom line, every local public health director has the ability to declare a local health emergency. And I believe that Newsom's a legitimate, moral, ethical authority to declare a statewide emergency ended months ago. I believe he should have returned local control to figure out what works best. And I'll just use restaurants. Restaurants are estimated to have a 50 to 70% closure rate. I, for the life of me, when I went into restaurants and tables were 6 feet apart and the staff was masked up, I believe the onus was on Newsom to tell us why that wasn't working. Because I don't believe that's where people were catching the disease. I think they were catching the disease at home, which is why the stay-at-home order magnified the problem. It did not alleviate it.
Thanks. So, kind of pulling the lens back and looking at our broader economic trends and concerns in this area, you're well aware that the foundational industries here in Santa Barbara County and on the Central Coast have for generations been agriculture and the oil and gas energy sector, right? Both of those industries are facing increasing pressure, and it's becoming more and more difficult for them to succeed and continue to be the driver that we've been used to, right? How, as a member of Congress, how would you support those industries or help them to transition to a model where they can continue to be economic drivers, going forward?
Well, thank you for that. Glenn, as you know, for 30 years, 30 years ago, we formed the Coalition Labor, Agriculture, and Business for that exact express purpose. That is regulations and taxes were driving manufacturing and industry jobs out of here and making it more difficult for farming operations to exist. So I have 30 years of experience of knowing what is wrong with that regulatory approach. And let me just drop the bombshell on you here. The biggest single economic driver on the Central Coast is Diablo Nuclear Power Plant. $1 billion a year, all by its onesies, impact to the environment, to the economy. $250 million in annual payroll, $20 million in annual property taxes. I'm going to keep it open. Now, this is going to have, I'm going to need President Trump to do this, okay? No ands it's about, and I'm not running for Trump, I'm running for the district. I'm going to keep it open, and I'm going to push to get a ginormous desalinization plant built right next to it. I'm going to keep the lights on. I'm going to keep the jobs, keep the $1 billion annual in economic impact, $250 million in payroll tax, and fill every reservoir and underground aquifer on the Central Coast with water. That is what leadership or servant leadership does. It doesn't try to come up, and I'll give you two examples of this. Salute says, we've got to come up with a recovery plan. No, we cannot afford to lose 10% of our electricity supply in the middle of rolling blackouts. And for the people that are climate change enthusiasts, it's greenhouse gas-free energy. And the point here is Congress more than once has tried to fund quote unquote shovel-ready projects. Glenn, the shovel as it pertains to Diablo is to bury it. It's to kill it and bury it. I want an anti-shovel project. I want to keep it open, keep the lights on, keep the water flowing. And, there was supposed to be 2 to 3 nuclear reactors there. That thing could have ended up providing California with 30 to 40% of all of its electricity, 24/7 base load, no emissions, and these guys want to bury it. With regard to the oil companies, what Gavin Newsom doesn't want to acknowledge is that people have property rights above and below the ground. And we have mineral owners. Some of these farming and ranching families, the only way they're still in business is because they own mineral rights. And they have the property rights, land rights, plus the mineral rights. We've got to protect that industry. So you and I this morning heard a presentation by the Energy Information Agency, or Environmental, Energy Information Agency of the federal government. So, I review their work on the show periodically. There is no way America can go 100% fossil free and rely on solar and wind. Now, you could do it to some degree here, but what they don't tell you is you'd have to give up agriculture because they don't want to build those things, especially solar panels. They don't want them on the hillsides. They want them on prime ag land. But here's the thing. We live in sunny Central Coast. How does wind and solar work in Minnesota in the winter? Or North Dakota or Wisconsin or Boston or New York? It doesn't work at all. And secondly, if you go into the the states in the South, we've been to almost 40 states in our country. It's covered with trees. And I advise anybody to go watch Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans. It's free. Now, Michael Moore is not exactly a right-wing ideologue, okay? And he highlighted this whole thing's a house of cards. because it's supplemental. I'll give you one example. California does produce a lot of solar energy. It produces so much solar energy, we can't use it because solar primarily produces between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. in the day. We're maxed out on the amount of solar energy we could take into the grid because most people use the power in the evenings. So what do we do with our excess solar? Glenn, how's this for economic sense? We have to pay Arizona to take our excess solar. They don't buy it from us. We have to pay them to take it. And what does all this mean? Our electricity prices are 50% higher than the rest of the country. And they can't get enough. And so I want a balanced portfolio. I think rooftop solar is better than industrial scale. And let's get back to property taxes. You know, you're a private public partnership service industry as far as the chamber goes. Well, you know, the Santa Maria City Council helps support you through property taxes or sales taxes or bed taxes or what have you. California exempted industrial scale solar from property taxes. So we would swap the 20 million a year from Diablo for nothing from industrial scale solar. Then they like to talk about all the jobs they're going to create. Well, in Lompoc, they want to put this wind farm in Lompoc. You know how many jobs are going to be there permanently after construction? Six jobs. And I don't think they're going to be high paying because there's not much to do except watch that thing kill birds and bats.
Thanks. So, you know, in addition to kind of, you know, shoring up our foundation industries, the jobs that we have today, you know, I think there's still a need to diversify our economy and to try to find new ways of creating wealth and economic activity on the Central Coast. You know, and I think that there are some things that are in works, right? So Vandenberg Air Force Base is trying to find ways to accommodate additional commercial launch activity, and that, you know, seems to have some promise over the next several years. But, you know, like anything else, there's investment that will need to be made in order to prepare literally the land, in this case, for those kinds of business activities. What are some of what are some of the ideas that you would support or ways that you think the federal government can help in this region to diversify, right? To create new high wage, you know, high value industries here on the Central Coast?
Well, thank you for that. So as you know, like I said, I've been working on these issues for 30 years, so I know them fairly thoroughly. The jobs did not leave California and the United States for places like China on accident or on a whim. We drove those jobs out of here. So I grew up, and I want to take a little segue. This is the only opportunity our region has had in 100 years to elect somebody from the North County. It's been about 100 years since somebody that actually was either from Lompoc. I've lived in Lompoc, Orcutt, Santa Maria, and now Napomo. It'd be over 100 years that somebody was raised here. Andrea Seastrand lived here in the north, but all the other times we've been governed by somebody from outside of our region. So I know our economy. So when I lived in Lompoc, I lived in a house that was built by John Mansfield. I played Little League in a park that was donated by John Mansfield. I attended wedding celebrations in a event center that was built by John Mansfield. It was a corporate town. My neighbor hauled diatomaceous earth. It was a truck driver for John Mansfield. We need those jobs back, and they're been driven out. Like Grefco's gone, Santa Maria Chili, Sunoco, Aero Automotive, Union Sugar, which is where I used to work at. Company had been here 90 years. Why? Because of regulations. A number of regulations that drove them out. And so for us to bring back jobs from China, which has been stealing our lunch for decades now. We've got to change the rules and the regulations that drove industry out of here to begin with. And some of these things are, some of these rules and regulations are good in their essence. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act. All of those things, Mining Restoration Acts, all of those things are good in their essence. But the thing is they've ballooned and mushroomed. And when I say mushroom, it's like a mushroom cloud that blew up our economy. And so, farming, like building, and let me back up to Vandenberg. So I've lived here since 1968. And projects come and go from Vandenberg. Contracts come and go from Vandenberg. And unfortunately, a lot of the jobs that go out there are contractor jobs, or the person comes in, does their job, and they leave. So I'm hoping the Space Command would be something different, both public and private. But here's the deal, Glenn, and I've been making this speech in this valley for over 30 years. When I came out of college, I couldn't find a good paying job because it was the middle of a really bad recession. And I needed to pay, I didn't have nobody supporting me. So I ended up having to go work at Sinton and Brown, which is part of Union Sugar's straight graveyard shift seasonal labor. But it paid more than a white collar entry level job did. And then I worked my way up to industrial relations manager. Well, as industrial relations manager, I hired people every single season that didn't speak English, because I didn't need them to speak English. Our workforce is probably at least 40 or 50% Hispanic, including many of our supervisors. And here's my point. We have a ginormous number of people on the Central Coast, especially in Santa Maria. English is a second language. Barely a high school education, if that. They're not going to get jobs at Vandenberg Air Force Base. It's not going to happen. We need to create good old-fashioned manufacturing and industrial jobs like all the ones I just mentioned that we lost, so that people with limited English and or limited education can get a blue-collar, middle class job. That's what we need, and that's what I want, and that's what CoLab's been fighting for. Because let me just say this, Santa Barbara, which has represented us in Congress for decades, they're elitists and they're snobs. They believe that they have a super, super high number of college graduates. Hold on a minute. Sorry about that. They have a super high number of college graduates there, and with advanced degrees and all the rest. And so they think that shoe fits everybody. It does not fit us. It never will fit us. And I'm big for, I want to see vocational tech programs coming back to high schools. I help support Hancock's automotive tech program in hooking up those graduates with local auto dealers. There's lots of jobs that we can create for people in our community that fits our community. And that doesn't mean I don't want high-tech jobs, but the point here is some of the highest paying jobs are not in high-tech in our region. They're in oil and gas and Diablo nuclear power plant, which do not require a high school or more than a high school education in many cases.
Right. Yeah, that's a good segue to the next thing I wanted to chat about. One of the real concerns that we hear all the time from employers is the need to ensure that continual flow of quality workforce, right? Train people who know how to work and all those kinds of things. And cost of living here is what it is. And so recruiting people from the outside to come here can sometimes be challenging for businesses. And so, we're trying to think about, how do we ensure that workforce long-term through local activities, right? And so really focusing in two areas. One is, how do we address the educational pipeline? And I take your point that not every job needs a college degree, but some do and will, and it'd be nice if they could, if our kids could get those degrees locally, or at least closer. And then on the other side of it is, you talked about those who work in the fields or in some of our other industries that come from other areas. And so, the immigration system isn't working in terms of providing a secure workforce. And so curious as to your thoughts on either or both of those elements about how we make sure we have a workforce here that allows us to continue to build an economy that works.
Well, this is near and dear to my heart. I've always been frustrated that neither UCSB or Cal Poly would put a campus in the Santa Maria Valley. Santa Maria is the largest city on the Central Coast. You have to go down to Ventura to find a larger city, or go way up to God knows where in Monterey County. We're the largest city. And, for instance, UCSB has satellite campus in Ventura County, but not the North County. And Cal Poly, I took Cal Poly classes, I think when I started at Union Sugar Industrial Relations Manager. They did not make it easy for working professionals to find night classes. So if I'm elected, I hope I get elected as a regional leader, I'm going to call them on that they need to serve this community. Now, we do have, I think Hancock through Laverne and a few other schools have created some opportunities. But the other thing is we call this thing the school to prison pipeline. Well, it starts in the school. It actually starts in the home and then goes to the schools and then to prison. So I believe that we have to support family formation and family integrity. But with schools, we need school choice. So, I grew up in Lompoc, and there were a lot of my friends that were not going to go to college. There was no ands, ifs, or buts about it. They hated the normal routine academic route. They hated it. It didn't fit them. They had no desire or interest in it. Well, by golly, if I took calculus, I was an Allen Hancock student taking calculus on Lompoc Senior High campus with 20 or 30 other people for dual college credit, high school credit. Well, I don't know why we don't have the construction trade unions having an apprentice plumber, pipe fitter, electrician, or construction cohort on a high school campus, so those kids can learn their ABCs, learn to read and write, and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, graduated 18 years old, job ready for a job that's going to start at $50,000 to $100,000 a year. Folks, and this is part of why I'm running. Glenn, I never had any ambition to run for office. I got drafted and I volunteered because we're in a world of hurt. When Salud Carbajal, as an example given, keeps doing the same things over and over and over, throwing money at the same problem over and over and over, and the results never change. I want to change the equation. And I want to bring an entrepreneurial spirit to legislation. And somebody that knows, remember, he called Lompoc the armpit of the county. And when he refers to Lompoc or the North County, even as our congressman, he refers to us as they. He doesn't refer to us as us or we. It's always they. It's time for us to have our own representation. Now, I'm not going to neglect Santa Barbara in any way, shape, or form. But I'm not going to ignore the North County and all of SLO because he doesn't feel like he needs us. He gets his money and his votes out of Santa Barbara and UCSB, and he figures he's good to go.
Well, Andy, I appreciate the kind of time we've had to have a quick conversation here and to share some information with folks. For those of you that are watching on the video, would encourage you to learn as much as you can about the positions of our candidates, and then most importantly, vote. Right? It's important that our voices are heard, and the way you do that is by filling out a ballot. Right? Andy, just in the last couple of minutes, any priorities that you are focused on if and when elected that we haven't had a chance to touch on here today?
Well, before I get to that, something very important I missed. So we had, with brick and mortar businesses, which is what you primarily represent, they were already struggling against the internet. And then they got the COVID shutdown. And now what are they staring? They're staring at Prop 15, which is the largest tax increase in California's history, $12 billion a year, over $100 million annual impact just in Santa Barbara County alone. Salud Carvajal endorsed Prop 15. It will kill what's left of mom and pop businesses because of how much it will drive up triple net lease and everything else. So I want lower taxes, I want less regulations, and I want to focus on things that actually improve using federal dollars that will actually improve our situation. Every year I read the county budget book from cover to cover. Every year we spend $1 billion of state and federal monies and nothing ever changes. So I understand where the money's going. I understand the programs it's going to, and I can tell you nothing ever changes. And I'm a change agent. I'm a ramrod provocateur change agent. And we need more people like me in Congress. And I am a product of the North County. I reflect its values, its priorities, its goals, and its lifestyle. And I want us to be represented in Congress, which is why I've spent the last year campaigning for this seat. And I can tell you that, like I said, that I will help the Hispanic community by bringing a shoe, especially those with limited English speaking skills and the like, by bringing a shoe that fits so that they can finally come to the dance.
Well, again, sir, thank you for taking some time to be with us today. You mentioned you were, this was not a lifelong dream to be an elected official. And I want to thank you for stepping up.
Well, thank you.
Not everybody in the community is willing to step forward, raise their hand and say, I volunteer to be a leader in the community. So on a personal note, I respect those who do. Win, lose, or draw, I think it takes a lot of commitment and a lot of care for your neighbor and your community to put yourself forward and volunteer. And so appreciate that on your behalf.
Well, folks, I'm asking you to vote for Andy Caldwell for Congress. Our campaign website is andycaldwell2020.com. You are voting by mail, whether you signed up for it or not. And by the time you see this presentation, your ballot is probably in that junk mail stack on your kitchen table. So pull it out and vote for me. And Glenn, thank you for all the great work you do.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to our next episode. Again, thanks, Andy.
Thank you.